Welcome to episode 8 of Using AI, where we will be covering AI and coding, e.g. GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT and Code Interpreter and other plugins. And I'm sure there are some other tools that I don't yet know about. Can anyone code if they use AI? Are these tools accurate and helpful? If only we had some excellent co-hosts to discuss this with. Now, in a wild turn of events, we have Genie AI Python engineer Tom Wright on in place of Alex Papp, as Tom has a lot of experience working in ML and using AI as a coding assist tool. We also have AI founder Rafi Farouk, and I'm your host, Alex Den. As for last week, you can also watch our episodes on YouTube and see our ridiculous backgrounds, which are always AI generated. But yes, welcome to the show, Rafi and Tom.
It's a wild turn of events indeed.
Very fun to be on a podcast.
Is this your first podcast, Tom?
I think it is.
Would you describe yourself as a wild turn of events?
No.
Sorry, we're making your first podcast difficult.
I think I've watched thousands of hours of podcasts, so I probably should know how to make one by now.
I love that you just used the word watched casually, as if that's the normal way to consume a podcast.
Well, you have them on the background on YouTube.
Yeah, I personally watch more podcasts than listen to, actually.
Do you have YouTube Premium?
No, but on the laptop, you can obviously ban the ads using AdBlock Premium. On the phone, you can't, unfortunately.
This is the content everyone comes to this podcast for. That's some high quality information. All right, let's get on to talking about news from the week. And it's been quite a scaremongering week, but let's dive into that and then try and come out unscathed. Which one of you would like to go first?
Yeah, I can start. So Matt Clifford, who is an advisor to Rishi Sunak and also the CEO of Entrepreneur First, which is the company builder that we grew out of as Genie AI. So I know Matt Clifford pretty well. But anyway, he was in the news, and there are many articles that start with something like, AI could help produce deadly weapons that, quote unquote, kill humans in 2 years' time. And Matt actually consequently released a LinkedIn post that said he wasn't very happy with the headlines that papers wrote, but he did say the short and long-term risks of AI are real, and we have to think hard and urgently about mitigating them, but there's lots of nuance involved. So that's the headline, but we can definitely dig into it more.
I was going to say, it doesn't feel like, because I hadn't heard of Matt Clifford before. I didn't go through EF with you guys. The idea that the head of Entrepreneur First is then saying that this new technology could kill many humans within 2 years, it does feel a little bit odd. It does feel like something's not matching up. So so the media have sort of taken it out of context, because I think anyone could have a conversation and say, yes, AI could help us build weaponry, right? AI is already helping us to do lots of things, and AI could, that weaponry could then be used in conjunction with AI and it might kill people, right? So AI building weapons that kill people within 2 years feels like, I'm not saying that's what he said, but anything could be taken out of context.
Yeah, this just seems like another generically unhelpful piece of media, because Matt also said that you can imagine AI curing diseases, making the economy more productive, helping us to get to a carbon neutral economy, and so on. These articles just contain absolutely zero nuance. It's like, yeah, AI could kill us all, or AI could help us in various ways, and then let's just make the headline that they'll kill us all, and let's say nothing more of value.
You would imagine that we would get more nuance from a company as large as, say, Time magazine, who have been running a special feature on the end of humanity. So apparently, if it bleeds, it reads, and we're all going to die, according to Time and every media outlet.
I'm not sure what's their argument for why we're going to die, Alex.
Well, I think it's a title. So I think the end of humanity is just the name of a feature edition where they're talking about all of the different tasks, workflows, inventions, creations, optimizations that AI is going to bring across various different sectors, industries, and to many different products, consumers, businesses, enterprise, whatever. And, but it's posed as the fact that we're all going to die again. Why?
So I do think the economic risks of AI are more plausible. So lots of people seem to have read superintelligence and just be churning out the argument that existed 12 years ago that there's going to be a singularity. But I think the idea that a company manages to either create the products that people use and therefore get a bigger market share, or just steal a lot, or what would be the word, obtain a lot of the growth due to AI is more plausible.
I definitely agree. I think we are going to see that. We're going to see one-person departments, I should say, who can, achieve a lot of things with agents that assist and therefore mean that they don't need to hire additional people? Or are you suggesting, beyond the scope of that?
Well, it's if another company gets half of the profit. So you have an AI person who's doing lots of things, and then half of their earnings get transferred to Google, say. This is already sort of what happens in YouTube, right? So in YouTube, you have a presenter and they make £1 million from YouTube's ads, and Google also makes £1 million.
Although I think it's more than likely that Google makes £9 million.
I think it's a 50-50 split on YouTube. I'm not sure it will be a 50-50 split on AI.
If AI is seen as a form of capital rather than labor, then which it is, then we're just moving towards sort of, is it Thomas Piketty? His envisioned future based on the history of capital, a future that is more capital intensive than the past has been. And so we can get to the point where you have companies that are like 90% capital, 10% labor, whereas now maybe it's 30-70 or, some fraction.
So when I've thought about this before, I've thought that tech has had this effect where the top makes lots of money and the bottom makes lots of money. You still increase the kind of Gini coefficient.
Gini coefficient being the measure of inequality, not Gini coefficient being a metric that us, Gini AI, put out.
Yeah. I guess Gini's aim is probably to reduce the Gini coefficient, maybe.
I now feel like we need a coefficient. So on this point, actually, I think an interesting piece of news is about job cuts because of AI. So in the recent report about layoffs, I think there were 400,000 job cuts in the US in May, and AI has been referenced as a cause for 4,000 of those, which is, quite impressive. I mean, I know it's only 1%, and it is predominantly technology, so it's not quite fair to call it 1% of all, but like a percentage of technology layoffs. And so that itself could be quite a shocking figure. But JP Morgan themselves, like literally one company, have created nearly 4,000 AI-related job postings in the last 3 months. So, if the really important question to ask when you see metrics regarding the changes because of AI is to say, is that a big number? I don't think 4,000 is a very big number. It's an interesting number.
In terms of company growth, I mean, it's quite a big number, but JP Morgan are one of the biggest companies in the world. They're one of the biggest banks in the world, much bigger than Goldman Sachs, for example. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see many jobs laid. I thought you might say jobs laid off as a result in JP Morgan, but that's growth, right?
Yeah, that's just growth in JP Morgan. I mean, admittedly, they did just take on a large regional bank. So maybe they're just trying to automate all of their jobs and not call them layoffs because it's written down as some other thing in the merger documents. Call me a cynic. We're always a cynic on this podcast.
I was about to be cynical for you and say that those 4,000 jobs might be in place of several thousand more they could have hired.
You studied econometrics, didn't you, Alex? University.
I did.
Do you have opinions on when something generates jobs and when it destroys jobs?
So I've said this on a previous podcast, actually. The idea that a new technology destroys jobs is something that I think is fairly established that it doesn't. I believe when you improve the efficiency of something, you actually bring down the cost of producing something. And when you bring down the cost of producing something, but that item is still of value, it actually creates opportunities and more production happens overall. When more production happens overall, I think more jobs are created. And there's also more that is possible to consume or reprocess or refine. So from a sort of academic point, and AI specifically, I'm still, and I think people probably call me naively optimistic here, a strong believer that at least for the next decade, we're going to see massive shortages and we're not going to see lots of unemployment. We're going to see the increase of productivity push an increase in demand for labor. And I think wages will go up. I think lots of interesting things will happen.
Job shortage or skill shortage?
There will definitely be a skill shortage, and it will probably be more spiky than it's ever been. But I think that's because the rate of technological progress is more spiky than it's ever been. And that tends to go hand in hand.
I guess the way I've tried to think of this historically is you kind of have these economic cycles, and the way that you increase growth is sort of closing these cycles. And I wonder whether AI helps in having like cycles where one person trades with someone else, trades with someone else, trades with someone else, and eventually it gets back as like profit to the other person, or it makes things worse.
Well, here's the interesting thing is that we will be at a point, I mean, we're probably going off on a tangent here, we should bring it back. We'll get to a point where it's not people interacting with people, but actually APIs will transact more than humans. And that might already be the case in some industries in some ways. I just heard the CEO of Binance, Brian Armstrong, I think his name is, talking about the idea that cryptocurrencies are the perfect way for AIs to transact. So, I mean, I didn't really see that. I was like, use a dollar, who cares? But it is interesting because AIs will transact. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what that looks like.
So the capital only economy, to buy some shares in AI startups while you can.
I'm just going to correct myself. I mean Coinbase, not Binance.
The crypto people trying to get some of their shine back. Mind you, the price of Ethereum is back where it was before the crash of last year. So there is that.
So we've got two more pieces of news here. One is that Japan, apparently there's not much coverage of this in English media. I don't know if either of you want to take this. I think it's quite interesting. The gist is that Japan have said that copyright does not apply to materials used for training AI. Businesses have won out over protests from artists in Japan, and lots of, any artwork in Japan can be used to train AI, and the AI doesn't need to credit or compensate them as things stand, which I think is quite a dramatic stance to take and quite unique for a major economy of 200 million plus people.
So I've followed lots of arguments about this, and I've always felt there's some things that people don't say. So as an individual, if you go out and study art, you're allowed to replicate it. And I feel as if AI is kind of similar. If it's learning from it rather than using it as a raw material, then that feels like a good analogy. My thought on this is that people need to be compensated for creating data somehow. Perhaps copyright isn't the best means of doing it. Perhaps there are other ways of doing it. I kind of feel as if I want as much progress as possible at the moment, and less copyright means more progress. That's my thought on it. I kind of have a different feeling with art than I do with text. So I feel that people aren't like fundamentally stopped from doing things because they don't have enough art in their lives. Whereas I feel lack of ability to understand text, in the case of GD, say, create contracts, do these things, actually fundamentally stops people from doing stuff. So maybe my opinion differs between NLP and...
Without art, there's no meaning to life, Tom.
I guess maybe I have sufficient meaning and just want to access the knowledge to impose my meaning on the world.
You're a robot. No, I'm kidding. I thought you might say that art should be valued more than text in terms of copyright because it contains more human skill to create it, more proprietary skill, generally speaking. I mean, it could be like a storybook, but yeah.
You think text contains more skill or art contains more skill?
Art, because in most cases, art is the final product of the person creating it, and that's how they make their livelihood. Whereas if you're just writing some emails, that's an intermediate form of communication. Of course, if it's a big piece of text, an article or a storybook, then that's different.
I sort of feel as if text can contain infinite complexity because it's built from ideas. So if you take like a philosophical tract and compare it to a children's book.
I don't know, a picture tells 1,000 words, right? This is like as philosophical as we can get. There's no right answer, I guess.
My argument is almost more based on utility. So saying art is less useful. So therefore, there is a strong argument to set it free.
Oh, and this is interesting. I just think we have different utility functions. So yours is economic, and mine would be more like I think beyond that, like enjoyment and life value and meaning and things you can't measure.
Are you calling Tom a robot again?
No.
So in the US, there is this thing where everything, well, firstly, all law has to be public domain, and also everything produced by the government has to be public domain. And that's the kind of analogy that I think is good. So in a sense, access to law is necessary to function in society. And I almost think of access to understanding as necessary to function in society. It's almost a liberal argument rather than an economic argument.
Yeah, I get what you're trying to say. Access to text, given massive amounts of business is done in text, would be helpful. Basically, it's hard to deny that.
That said, we have a business podcast here, and we're using art in the background.
Is a nice segue to the pictures. Tom, what have you got behind you?
A random picture I found when I didn't look at the details of the picture, but it looked nice.
It was generated by Midjourney there?
You referred me to the Midjourney website, and
I referred you to Reddit, not the Midjourney website. I just straight up stolen that from Reddit after we've been talking about stealing art, and I always just steal art for the podcast. I'm a bad person.
Do you think someone tried how long do you think someone spent optimizing the prompt?
Well, that is a question. I think people can spend a long time creating the perfect prompt for an image. I think there are jokes that actually you spend so long creating the perfect prompt that it would have been quicker to just do it without AI.
So I have a friend who's a part-time artist, and when Stable Diffusion kicked off, I sent her pictures about this, and she really didn't like Stable Diffusion. I think the argument was something like there is something in the act of expression of drawing art that cannot be captured with prompt engineering.
I mean, that's interesting because you think of things like pointillism in the 19th century, a form of impressionism where artists create pictures based on dots. So they'll just paint thousands and thousands and thousands of dots until they get to their end picture. The beauty is obviously in the pain of creation, but I'm not sure that's the only form of beauty.
I suppose the argument would be the act of drawing creates unique understanding which doesn't exist in text. Not just like the suffering and effort involved, but the transformative process of the production of art or something like that.
All right, let's shift away from art and talk about coding and AI. So, Tom, this is why you can't be on the podcast. You see, the discussion is far too interesting before we even get to the theme.
But I'm quite enjoying it.
I'll be sure to bore you during the main part.
All right, let's just dive into the main part. So, you use AI every day as you code?
So a couple of months ago, I was using it every day for coding. Now I'm doing things that are a bit less intense coding. So I'm more using it for document referencing at the moment. But yeah, there was a good 4 months when I was using Copilot features every day.
Copilot's not even that old, right? If I remember correctly, it came out around the time of ChatGPT. Is that fair?
I think it's earlier because I set it up in my editor, and I might have set up ChatGPT if it had existed before.
Oh, nice. So you've used Copilot and have you used Copilot X? Is there much of a difference between Copilot and Copilot X from GitHub?
I have just used Copilot.
The history of coding AIs, I did extensively use Codex by OpenAI, but they subsequently deprecated that and folded it into GPT 3.5 Turbo. But yeah, it was okay at the time. You could build some basic code, even UIs, front ends. Anything too complex, it wouldn't work so well. But you could do things like create me a table of the countries of the world ranked by GDP. So you can mix coding plus general knowledge, which is quite cool.
I've seen an amazing video where this data analyst chap goes through 10-15 examples of using code interpreter in ChatGPT, which I imagine also leans on what you're referring to, which is baked into GPT-4 now. And he gives it just CSVs. He gives it like pretty ugly sets of data and says formatted like this, and then output it. in a three-dimensional graph, a topographical graph, and then from the data points, he has created a 3D model of a volcano, for example, and you're like, that's really cool. Or he does. I don't know if you guys have come across Gap Finder, chap Hans Rosling and Factfulness, brilliant bloke, and he was one of the original TED Talk stars, if you like, where he shows these different size bubbles. As the population of a country grew, the bubble would grow, and then it would move as GDP per capita grew. And this chap just put in the same data that Hans Rosling used for Gap Finder and just recreated the sort of Gap Finder charts just by asking it to do certain things in natural language. And then he was like, pick out the 5 most interesting ones and color them nicely, because they were just like horrible gray lines. And then it just does that. No more messing around with the horrible faff of cleaning and making data pretty for presentation.
You just gave me the really fun idea of, because people love visualizations. So there's this great framework in JavaScript that's been there for a long time called D3.js, which can help you create all manner of visualizations and all sorts of graphs. So I imagine, given there's lots of training data on that, since they have loads of blog posts and loads of GitHub repos on it, you could probably create very complex graphs and visualizations that look really cool using GPT as a code generator.
You probably already can using ChatGPT, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, I was on the note of diagrams from code generation or just diagram generation. There is a plugin on ChatGPT that can generate vector diagrams from text. I played around with it a little. It works okay.
There is a textual representation of these sort of diagrams. So I've used a tool which the name amazed me for a second, but in theory, you could just ask it to generate things in that format, and it would probably know how to do so. But it's not GraphViz. There is another tool that's often used for system diagrams.
Can I ask a really stupid question? As I'm the least codey here by a country mile, may I add. When you use a coding assistant, are you using it within an editor? Are you using it within deployment workflows? Are you using it to help you comment and debug? I know, Rafi, you use it for generating really nice formatted user stories from a product management perspective, which then feeds into development work as well, which is a nice use case. But yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about that, and then Tom, if you want to pick up any of the questions.
Sure, yeah. In terms of product management, every PM has probably faced the challenge of writing lots of user stories. Obviously, they are quite formulaic, so they do lend themselves quite well to generative AI. And so if you just specify the requirements, the output format, then you can generate great user stories. I also create behavior scenarios, tests, acceptance criteria. I still review them, obviously, and make any tweaks where it's not quite right. And yeah, that's great. And I also do use GPT, by the way, to generate code. And for a time, I was writing some code to fine-tune my own transformer just for my own learning. I was using GPT extensively to generate the code to fine-tune GPT. So an AI generate an AI.
Are you using just a ChatGPT window for all of it out of the browser, or do you have any?
Yeah, I was. I didn't have it embedded into the IDE or anything. I imagine your use cases are more advanced.
I also had when ChatGPT was earlier on, I had this experience where it was faster for me to search for documentation than it was to wait for the ChatGPT window to load to put in the details.
Yeah, so the way I use it is, rather than thinking of the model to generate an entire program of code, if you have the person that helps the most is the person who's not a professional coder, but neither knows nothing about code. I feel like someone like me who's in the middle somewhere, I know what questions to ask, what specifications to give it, and what frameworks to use, that sort of thing. And then with enough information, it does provide reasonably good outputs, but you also have to be able to know when it hallucinates as well.
I guess that's almost indexing into like the global knowledge base rather than doing a particular task that you wouldn't know how to otherwise.
Exactly. And I use it like almost as if it was another blog post. I use it as a data point to compare against blog posts and then together draw all that information to create the best piece of code for that particular problem. How do you use it?
Lots of ways. So Copilot works pretty well. I've done stuff where you can write the function specification for utility functions, and it will just spit out the correct implementation, which you then tweak. One thing that I think might happen in the future is that the programmer's task will essentially become task decomposition. You'll decompose a task up, and then it will be able to implement every single component that you use. That's worked pretty well. I've had it write almost complete unit tests for things I'm implementing, which seems quite similar to your behavioral acceptance criteria stuff. And then you just tweak them again. And that's worked pretty well. I use it to occasionally finish what I'm writing, where it can work quite well. So you think, oh, a model is going to be able to guess what I'm doing. It's quite strange because it's like, you often feel like it's almost like there's a bit of your brain running, but it's not quite connected to your brain. And then you need to tell it to do the right thing, which is slightly odd. So I often find myself like prompting, adding information for Copilot to use. One thing I use quite a lot is, say, effectively you can do a prompt inside Copilot and get it to complete, and then it will write an implementation of what you're doing, and that's worked pretty well. I don't know if it's faster.
Does it edit in line, or is it like a chat interface within a development environment?
So it behaves just like autocomplete, but more. I don't actually know how it behaves in VS Code because I'm an Emacs user, and it's too late for me to change. So I plugged it into VS Code. But why I plugged it into Emacs? But I just have a key binding that says complete, and then it inserts a suggestion for what the code should be. The interface is your input is your code and your cursor position, and the output is a suggestion of more code to add, which is very language model-esque.
You still have to work out how to connect it to the rest of your code, basically.
No, it does it in place.
Okay.
You send your entire program and it inserts things back. It tells you what code you want to add at the point.
You can accept or reject.
Yes, or you can take a bit of the text. So
Right.
I don't take the first line. One of the problems I found is it occasionally gives you too much text, and then you just end up wanting to take the next line. One thing it's not good at, which I want something better at, which maybe Copilot X, which I haven't used, is editing, doing tasks in your code based on instructions. Often I sometimes want to say refactor a function or change a function to use a different API, and it often doesn't behave very well there. For that sort of stuff, I've sometimes found GPT 3.5 Turbo, which is the little brother of GPT-4, does an okay job. Sorry, notifications in the background. I've got this. And
by the way, little brother or sister, mind you.
Little sibling. Another thing I've done is I have this horrible hacky script will look at my clipboard and then run an instruction that it prompts me for with a pop-up on what is read from the clipboard, and then it writes back into the clipboard. So for example, I could highlight a bit of text, press a key binding, say remove the indentation or indent this correctly, press enter. It will then pop up a window saying what is done, and then I press Control V or Command V to paste that in place.
I think you're the master of automation.
Well, I've wasted too much of my life trying to make myself more efficient by adding automation. I think with AI, one could actually make yourself more efficient rather than just. I think often it's kind of a wash, right? It's more fun doing it, but you don't necessarily make a winning the time that you're doing it. Maybe long term you win. I think with AI it's going to be a bit different.
So based on where things currently are, I'm going to have so many questions about this, but just based on where they are and the usage that you've done, and your experience of it, would you say you're like a percentage more productive with Copilot? Are you able to put a percentage on it?
I don't feel massively more productive. I know lots of people say 10 times. There's a question about whether it's where the bottleneck is in code generation. I think one feels happier. It removes parts of the drudgery, but you still make decisions. The other thing, there are lots of memes about this, but it doesn't necessarily fix debugging for you. So I don't think it's like a magic bullet that solves stuff. Like I'd say maybe it's 20% more efficient.
Alex is going to publish an article being like, Tom says AI makes him 1,000 times more efficient and AI is going to kill the world.
AI made me 10 times more productive by killing me.
It's weird because software has always been automating itself.
Yes.
We've always had tools that generate code or libraries that you can reuse, and then this self-optimization process. And in a sense, I don't necessarily feel it's a difference in kind, but it's like another thing to add.
Yeah, I've always said it's a difference in scale, not in type. It's in degree and scale. And so, as you say, these things, automation have been happening for a long time, but now it's just way more powerful and way more accessible.
One thing that's really good is not having to memorize libraries anymore. That's a thing that happens. So that kind of kicks in on the learning curve part rather than on the expert use part.
So just to clarify a couple of things for people who maybe don't know, when you say libraries, you're meaning you're coding, and rather than having to build something from scratch, you just plug into something that is a standalone features, I suppose, and you can borrow from that library to do the task that you want to do rather than needing to incorporate it like from scratch within your code. Is that fair? And because I saw a Reddit post today actually where someone was saying that this new feature from ChatGPT, or this new plugin, would mean that you wouldn't need, it's just going to completely kill this library. And I think we're going to see a lot of libraries just fall off because you don't know that it's a library. It's just something that's embedded within a large language model.
I would say it lets you know how to use a library quite quickly. So a good example is Pandas. So Pandas is a library that everyone uses. It's got loads and loads of features. Often it does a specific thing in quite a weird, obtuse way that you learn, and then you become more efficient by doing so. And I can now, if I want to do something, I press my key binding, type in the question, and it will give me a code snippet in my clipboard to paste. And that means I don't have to read the documentation.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting.
It's basically making the library use, I don't know if it's less expert. In a way, it's making it easier for you to become an expert because you can find out these interesting niche use cases or special ways of doing things, or like idiomatic ways of doing things more easily.
Yeah, I think it works because you're not trying to generate, in this particular case, massive amounts of code. You just want to get a small snippet for that particular task, and therefore the language model is likely to give you the correct syntax or method or function that the library uses. And by doing that, you're learning faster than searching for it for ages online or and so on.
In theory, there's the context relevant search as well. It might be very difficult to express precisely what you're trying to do, but if you can see the code, it may be easier to work out what you're trying to do. That might be a killer feature of Copilot as opposed to ChatGPT.
Yeah, but the risk or the downside is that you can get stuck in local optima very easily. So yeah, even when I was trying to generate some code to train transformers, GPT would generate the pre-processing code in a very certain way. But you didn't always have to do it that way. So this goes very much in the more general sense. If you're trying to use ChatGPT for searching the internet, as I often do, given there now are plugins that do that with ChatGPT, but if you just use ChatGPT, you'll get very much local optima, a very condensed form of the internet according to ChatGPT, and the internet is already condensed and biased anyway.
Another problem I found is propensity for lying, or as people say, hallucinations in these models. I've had stuff where it's given me the wrong answer. This one example where I had this function I wanted to call, and it said that's been removed from Python. I asked, when was it removed from Python? And it gave me an answer about when it was removed, and it kept on lying until I went and checked, and it's just been making a plausible lie about why this function isn't here.
So interesting to know why and when it lies. Someone I was speaking to yesterday at a conference told me that they had a very long argument with a very stubborn ChatGPT over something. And I feel like this is one of someone has used AI a lot if they've ended up having a proper argument with it.
I think sometimes there's a way of phrasing a question so that it's possible to lie, and there's a way of phrasing a question so it isn't possible to lie. And I guess this is one of the things you learn by interacting with the language model.
Yeah, I was thinking the other day, first of all, I think the clues in the word prompt, so you can very much prompt it to lie with the right prompts. But I was thinking, even with Google, when you're reading whatever articles or links or news articles, you are skeptical. If you read a news article, you do decide, is this biased to left or right? From what lens did the person publish this? And it's just the same with GPT. You should be skeptical, but with a different angle of skepticism.
It kind of has a helpful bias sometimes.
So let's come back to the way that it actually delivers code, right? There's like coding best practices. There's principles like dry, don't repeat yourself. There's various other things. What does it follow? What doesn't it follow? Rafi, you mentioned like user testing, and we've mentioned unit testings. Gherkin is a format I'm familiar with. Is that obviously you can prompt it to do something, but if you don't prompt it to act in a certain way, which I imagine every time you're not, using this pre-constructed prompt, you're probably just sort of prompting as you go as a bit of a workflow. Is it like really annoyingly opinionated towards one way of coding or another?
I sort of feel that lots of those sort of principles of good software design apply at a higher level than where it normally gets used. And then it's not necessarily that relevant because you've already made it, put it in the right place, the right things. Sometimes it doesn't format things as you want them. It is probably going to impose standards about function naming and how to use methods that aren't. One thing I'm afraid of is it may well end up lowering code quality, because why have something nice in general and like some shared functions when you could just spit out implementation for exactly what you want to do using ChatGPT. It feels like it might generate the kind of code that you see in these big enterprisey organizations.
There's a few interesting points here. On the style, I did notice that it would spit out functions and pieces of code with a comment above each piece of code. And I know that in the olden days, commenting everything was a good thing, but in the modern days, a lot of programmers think that your code should be so clean that it doesn't even require comments.
It's read all the tutorials which have comments. It's repeating them back to you.
Yes, probably that. What was your last point, Tom? That was also quite interesting. Oh, sorry, go on, yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just arguing that it might decrease code quality because people, instead of using abstraction within their code to make things faster and more maintainable, they'll just generate more code.
Yes, it won't build architectures, it will build snippets, basically, sequences of snippets.
I'm trying to remember like the biggest class I've had it generate. It can sometimes generate bigger things. Yeah, it won't generate a framework for you yet.
When you've used it, I know this is probably much like any other assistance tools where you prompt it, it generates stuff, and then you obviously review it, you cut out the fluff, you improve it, and then you apply it and you move on to the next prompt. So this question's probably a bit moot, but when you've been using it, how much of the code would you say is written by it and how much is written by you?
More by it than me.
Yeah.
The thing is, the stuff that takes up space isn't very complicated. So you want to get someone else to do it for you. Because if it's the decisions that you make, like where to split something into two functions, the algorithm to use.
Yeah, it's like every software engineer becomes an architect rather than a low-level engineer.
It's interesting in comparison to what it's like when coding as well. I once did this exercise where I recorded exactly what I did when I was coding. So I had a screen recorder and I went back and watched what I did before. And I had this very, very interesting observation that what felt like so I thought I spent about 20 seconds thinking here. I went back and watched it and I literally sat there for like 5 minutes. So I think if you could somehow correlate the amount of time it took for you to do something and the amount of time it took for the AI to do something, they'd be quite similar.
I mean, surely the AI is faster. No.
The bits the AI does, which are quick, are things that you would do quickly as well. And like the decision associated with the function itself, like the function name and what it's going to do, is slow.
I see. Yeah, it's the kind of subjective, not subjective, but idiosyncratic decisions that you just have to make for the particular job you're doing. It's like naming a child, right? Like, but having said that, Nitish, our co-founder, did use GPT to shortlist a list of names to name his child. So yeah.
So did I, until it recommended about 14 good names, and then it said Jeremy 100 times.
Off topic.
For a girl. Jeremy.
I was in Finland 2 weeks ago, and there you don't name your child until you brought them home. I think I think you need to name them before 6 months, but you like decide what personality they have and you give them the name that corresponds.
Why is Finland just smarter at us than everything?
I think they do it in Denmark as well. And then they said that you had name days. You would celebrate like, this is Tom Day, this is Raffy Day. But it kind of makes sense because you've already chosen like the character of the name, and then that will get tuned over time as people keep on rechoosing it and you have a day to celebrate. Anyway, very off topic.
Very off topic, and I know Rafa wants to say more, so I'm going to stop him. So one thing that is a piece of news, I was going to save it for the crazy things this week, but DeepMind released something yesterday. AlphaGo is a name that a lot of people will recognize as the AI program that defeated the champions of the game Go, which is very difficult. You know, it's been in the news for that sort of solving of complex problems. And they are now applying alpha to various different things. So alpha dev, I don't know if alpha dev is something that you guys have come across before, but alpha dev came out with something yesterday as a system that uses reinforcement learning to discover enhanced computer science algorithms, surpassing those honed by scientists and engineers over decades. So there's two things that I want to bring up on this. The first is that, you know, sorting is a very painful problem. Right, it's a problem that no one really wants to have to think about, but people have had to do it, and they have solved it in various ways, and some are better than others depending on the type of data that you have to sort, right? Whether it's characters, whether it's numbers, whether it's books on a library shelf, right? And how you're sorting it. That's the sort of problem we're talking about when I'm talking about sorting. What they did is, rather than going, okay, here's the C++ sorting algorithm that is an application of this method of sorting, the AI went like down to the very bare level of like assembly instructions and started from scratch effectively of how to figure out how to sort optimally. And it took all of the existing sorting algorithms and ways of doing things, and then using the same sort of reinforcement learning that it used for trading on Go, it found new ways of sorting. And so the headlines are that it found short sorts, and short sorts are often used within larger sorts, that were 70% faster, which is massive, right, in terms of efficiency and optimizations, and sorts that were, you know, nearly 2% faster for lists of 250,000 plus. So obviously, you know, it goes down the larger the data, but applications that require a lot of short sorts, I imagine that's a game changer in terms of required processing power, effort, time for the user to get the result.
I'm not that impressed. Depressing answer. Well, so there's a theoretical maximum for how efficient a sorting algorithm can be, which is n log n. And we've reached n log n ages ago, which means that for large lists, nothing is going to be particularly better. So you might be able to like change the constant. You can't fundamentally change how efficient things are. And computers just get faster every year anyway. So I don't know if you fundamentally changed that much. I've actually read the section of Knuth's book on sorting a while ago, and it was talking about these sort of especially efficient ways of sorting particular lists. And I find it quite plausible that there's just some magic clever method that happens to be more efficient for a list of 5 elements to do fewer comparisons. I guess, yeah, I can imagine being a bunch more efficient at sorting like 30 elements. It won't apply for short lists. I wonder whether there is a literature in computer science, which I've read, on like theoretically how do you efficiently sort this number of elements, and whether it's more of interest to that literature, which might have applications elsewhere than it is to the general act of sorting. I guess a big thing is that it's discovering algorithms for itself, which is good.
Right, and my take was that it might look at, maybe this is really ignorant, but it might look at libraries or existing applications, and it will just find completely novel ways of solving those, like the data center power distribution. I think, you know, there are data centers that have implemented algorithms for cooling and heating that are now saving between like 4 and 20% of energy, which, you know, is one example. But will it just like suck in all the libraries and spit out better, quicker ones that do exactly the same thing with the same functions? I think probably, surely someone's doing that. Maybe that's nonsense.
Feels more like in specific cases, it will find something more efficient. It's not like it feels like at a specific level than at a big level.
I think, if I may say more generally, a fantastic use case, and this goes to the opposite end of fear mongering in terms of using AI for our benefit as humans. A fantastic use case would be to predict the answer to mathematical problems, because if we can make breakthroughs in quantum physics, fundamental mathematical challenges that no one's ever solved, that's obviously great.
This has been going on for a while, and I'm not sure. I know a mathematician, and I still think he does most of his work with a pen and paper or a walk.
But that has to change very soon, right? Like that can't continue, because obviously GPT is not doing very well on mathematical equations just now, but it's not trained for that. As soon as we focus on that problem, we'll surpass it.
It's weird. Part of the problem of this often seems to be the last mile more than solving itself. From what I understand, formalizing mathematics and making your proof like formal can be massively complicated, and it's very difficult just to like express your problem in informal terms. If you look at Wolfram Alpha, what its aim is it's effectively to take a vague description of a problem and then convert into maths and then solve it. I almost feel as if there are bigger wins there. It shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the case that there are bigger wins just by letting people convert informal mathematics to formal mathematics and then apply solvers to it. But I almost feel as though there are bigger wins there than there are in the solvers themselves, which is an LLM type problem, converting from an informal language to a formal language. It's distractable. I'm just suspicious that the problem actually exists within the provers rather than within the interface, the provers. But this is based on someone who spent too much time trying to get provers running on his computer to play with maths.
Maths problems to crazy news from the week. Rafi, I feel like it's a beautiful segue to your piece.
Sure, yeah. So AI 21 Labs concludes the largest Turing test experiment to date, according to them. But nonetheless, they seem to be this organization that they do create some products like WordTune. You may have seen that. But they launched this experiment in April, where they now have more than 10 million conversations for a game that sends a message and you have to decide, is it human or not? And more than 1.5 million participants around the world took part. This is essentially a social Turing test, supposedly. So you have to tell if the output was created by a human or an AI. And the result was that 68% of people guessed correctly, which I don't know if you'd say that's a lot or a little. I'd probably say it's a little, because it shows that 32% of the time the AI is convincing enough to be human. Although a separate discussion is, why are we even trying to make AIs human when they can surpass humans? But yeah, another interesting point was there were some differences in the country. So people from France seem to guess with the highest level of accuracy at 71.3%. I don't know what that means, what that says. And men and women were roughly equal in terms of their accuracy. Women were slightly more accurate, which, if anything, if you normalize that, is quite impressive, given obviously the industry for AI is male dominated.
I just tried it, and I started the conversation by saying hello with 3 L's in it, and I was like, that's gonna get me some good information. Human would just say hello back, or something, or think I'm a child. The AI said sloppy greeting space. You need to work on that. Dot. I was like, you are definitely AI, because that is perfect punctuation, and it's just seen as passive aggressive if you're a human, and you wouldn't do that, surely.
I reckon that's something Tom would say.
Am I a human or an AI?
That is true. You could be an AI. So
you've just reminded me of something. Some chap posted on Reddit saying, God, the amount of time I mentioned Reddit, saying that he would have a chance to ask Sam Altman some questions, obviously at a conference that he was at or something. The top-rated answer. So he was like, "What questions should I ask?" And all the comments, obviously, Reddit being Reddit. The top one was like a really long prompt, but to try and get him to reveal that he is actually an AI. And the idea was that he would respond and say, as an AI, I cannot respond to these sorts of questions.
You need to try the escapes like people were doing with ChatGPT. Escape from his guardrails and start getting him to do things. It's interesting that you picked politeness as the way of discovering whether something was an AI. I don't know.
Politeness, punctuation, and I think accurate, like the accuracy and picking up on it. Because I guess there was a few things, I suppose.
Because more generally, if you look at humanness, I think other people made this argument, but some aspects of humanness aren't actually that complicated. I've heard arguments that like social niceties or emotions aren't necessarily that complicated, yet people consider them the most human. There's things like, can I follow a long conversation where I change topic a bunch of times, or analogy can be more complicated. There are these artificial intelligence tests that are, I think they're called ARC, that people have been trying, which I think like a computer has solved one of them, or some ridiculously small number.
Yeah.
But my main thesis is the nice squishy parts of humans aren't necessarily very human. Maybe it's more cold of humanity that is more. I
definitely wasn't 100% sure, but I was very much leaning towards AI when that response came back. So we're in the final segment, Tom, where we talk about crazy things we've seen this week. We've had the Turing test. I'm going to pop a link to the Human or Not game in the show notes if you want to give it a try. It's quite fun, and it doesn't take long at all. You just get 2 minutes to chat, but I ended my conversation early because, obviously an AI. Did you have anything crazy you've seen in the news this week, Tom, that you'd like to share?
You put me on the spot, and I don't really.
Well, I can fill the slot if you like.
You say something, and it'll remind me of something else, and I can interrupt you.
Well, so I'm a big fan of the way that AI is going to help us render and visualize virtual worlds. I think that is going to be massive, right? NPC, like non-player controlled characters who have like Turing test like conversations with you. But there's so NVIDIA, obviously they're all the rage at the moment. They've released this thing called Neural Angelo, which shows them being able to render in 3D something that is recorded in 2D. And I think that's going to save so much time for anyone who's like developing virtual worlds or creating environments, because you can just create it in 2D, maybe create it in 2D from another angle, and then it can create like a full 3D rendered world from that. And so the horizon in front of you, I guess, can always be 2D. And then as you interact with it, it can be like rendered as you go. And I know actually NVIDIA's most recent graphics cards, I think something like 4 out of every 10 pixels, or it might even be like 9 out of every 10 pixels is rendered on the fly using predictive algorithms rather than, actually put there deliberately, which I think is very cool. So you get like really nice light effects and water effects because of that sort of clever effect.
I saw that one. One thing I thought was whether it could recognize the optical illusions that confuse humans, and whether this would tell us something about whether these optical illusions are fundamental or just to do with humanness. Have you seen like the person who seems very big because of where they are in a room, and they walk away and then they seem abnormally small? I have a friend who works in shaders as well. Maybe AI will turn out of a job.
Well, I mean, effectively, that's what we keep coming back to. AI, future of work, AI and coding. I think that probably about does it for this episode. Next week, we will be speaking about the idea of an AI political party. Now, I don't expect that that's going to be our most popular episode, but I know that it's something that Rafi and I are both particularly excited about. Wouldn't it be lovely if politicians could actually enact policy that was like median and like useful and based off principles, and building on all of the policies that were and were not successful, and standing on the shoulders of every politician that came before them? But no, we don't have politicians like that. We have flawed human beings. Maybe we will see an AI political party coming soon. But for now, we will just make do with AI coding assistants. And I suppose, we still have to work with Tom until he's been fully replaced and automated, although it does seem like Rafi secretly considers him a robot.
Maybe I am a robot trying to add more robots.
Do you replace a new employee each week with a robot?
4,000 in the last month, Tom. Not Rafi specifically. All right. Until next time. Thank you, Tom, for joining us this time.
Not sure. Thank you very much. And it was an enjoyable podcast.
Thank you.